Am I the curious? I am the curious. These stories that happen here are literally surreal. At least I think so, right? Am I stupid for telling my parents to ask their adopted children to help instead of me? My life, I'm 34, male, could have been good growing up, except my parents wanted to be good people, so they became foster parents. I think that was a noble of them. These children needed help. The bad thing is that I was ignored. I received less attention than those kids because I was independent and didn't need any help. Gifts from my grandparents became gifts to the family. The grandparents put an end to that by not buying me gifts, but taking me to walks. I went to the movies and went out to dinner and went on weekend trips with my grandparents. My dad's parents took me to Disneyland, and my mom's mom and dad took me to New York. My parents tried to get the money for these things given to me, them instead. I begged my grandparents to do it. I left home when I was 17. I graduated early and went into a trade. My grandfather was in the union, and he put me there. I've been at this for 17 years, and I'm doing well. My parents are not. They exhausted themselves taking all those children. Even the money they earned was not enough to compensate for their sacrifices. They asked me for help, and I said no. I know that if I gave them money, they will waste it on the children they took in after I left. I told them they had the plethora of foster children that could ask for money. My mother said that she was disappointed in me and that she thought she had raised me better. I said I raised myself from the age of 8 onwards. My grandparents are also broke. My parents already owe them a lot of money. My wife says she understands how I feel, but she thinks I'm being mean. My mother thinks I'm holding a grudge from my childhood, but I assume he's still giving my old stuff to the new kids. I was reflecting on the situation. Life has taught me that wanting to help others sometimes ends up helping no one. My parents, in their nobility, decided that they could be salvation for many children in vulnerable situations. I admire their desire to make a difference, but I wonder if it was truly the best choice for our family. I, at 34 years old, still find myself thinking about what would have been if things had been different. Am I being unfair by holding on to a grudge? Am I a bad child for not wanting to help now that they are in trouble? My wife says I need to let go of the past, but now I can't ignore years of emotional neglect? Leaving home at 17 was liberating for me. I worked hard, I gained my independence, but the price was high. The pain of being constantly left out doesn't go away easily. I always thought that one day my parents would recognize how much I suffered. That recognition never came, and now they expect me to be the solution to their financial problems. I keep thinking about the children my parents took in. They had needs too, and I don't want to blame them for what happened. But it hurts me to note that my parents always prioritized these children over me. Receiving less attention, less affection, and fewer gifts was hard. But what hurt most was realizing that my feelings and needs were constantly ignored. Talking to my mother is an exercise of frustration. She insists that she did the best she could, that she tried to balance things, but the reality is that I was neglected. She says that she hoped that I, being older and independent, could understand and support their decision. But now, can a child understand that he does not deserve the same love and attention as others? My wife is my safe haven, but even she thinks I'm being too harsh. She believes that helping my parents now that they are struggling would be an act of compassion and forgiveness. But how can you give someone who never apologized? How can I reach out to those who never gave me the support I needed? My reflection lead me to a moral dilemma. What is right for a father and mother to do? Should they have prioritized more? Me? Should they have found a better balance? Or maybe I should be more understanding and accept that they did the best they could given the circumstances? I know holding a grudge isn't healthy, but it's not easy to just forget and move on. Visiting my grandparents has always been a refuge. They gave me the affection and attention that I didn't receive at home. They were the ones who showed me that I was important, that I deserved to be treated with love and respect. And ironically, now they are also broke because of my parents. So how can I help my parents without harming my grandparents even more? I think about the future. I'm afraid of repeating my parents' mistakes. I want to give my children the love and attention that I didn't have. I want to be a present father who knows how to balance responsibilities and give the best to the family. But to do that, I first need to resolve these internal issues, understand what really matters, and how I can be a better person despite the hurt of the past. Maybe I should seek professional help, talk to a therapist, maybe someone who can help me deal with these conflicting feelings, finding a path of forgiveness and acceptance. Perhaps this is the key to finally finding peace and being able to move forward without a weight of the past. Meanwhile, life goes on. The day-to-day responsibilities, work, the family I'm building with my wife. Yeah, I try to focus on the present, but the shadows of the past still follow me. Every call from my parents, every request for help brings me back to that feeling of being the forgotten child, the one who didn't deserve the same attention and affection. I know I can change the past, but I can't choose how to react to it, you know? I can decide to be a better person, a better father, a better husband. But this decision needs to be accompanied by a healing process of understanding that my parents did what they thought was right, even if it hurt me deeply, you know? I believe that one day I will be able to look back and see all of this as a life lesson, something that made me stronger, more resilient. But for now, I continue on this journey of self discovery, trying to find my way through the painful memories and difficult choices. My parents may never fully understand the impact of their actions, but maybe, just maybe, with time I can forgive them and, who knows, even help them in some way. Not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to close this chapter of my life once and for all. As I reflect on all of this, I realize that life is about choices. And each choice has its consequences. My parents chose to help children in need, but it came with a cost. Now it's up to me to choose how I'm going to deal with the consequences of these actions, of these decisions, and how I'm going to build my future from it. The important thing is that I'm not alone. I have my wife by my side, my grandparents who have always believed in me, and perhaps a therapist to help me navigate these turbulent waters. With the right support and a dose of self-reflection, I believe I can overcome this phase of my life and find the peace I seek. The days passed and I continued to reflect on my situation. Every conversation with my mother, every request for help brought up feelings that I tried to bury. I knew I needed to find a way to deal with all of this, but I didn't know where to start. I decided that it was time to seek professional help. I made an appointment with a therapist, hoping he could give me through this process of healing and self-discovery. In the first sessions, I opened up about my childhood, my feelings of abandonment, and the hurt I still carried. The therapist helped me see that although my feelings were valid, you know, I had the power to change my perspective. He encouraged me to focus on the past and the future rather than dwelling on the past. He also helped me understand that it wasn't wrong to want to protect my current family. I had the right to set limits and decide how I wanted to help my parents, if at all. This realization was quite liberating. I realized I didn't need to feel guilty about not wanting to give them money. I could help them in other ways that didn't harm my own family. Over time, I started to feel more confident in my decisions. My wife was a great support throughout this process. She understood my internal struggles and encouraged me to follow my heart. We talked a lot about how we wanted to raise our children, what values we wanted to pass on to them. I wanted to be a present father who always put his family first without repeating past mistakes. I decided it was time to take a break. I didn't want to live with resentment for the rest of my life. I wanted to find a way to have a good relationship with my parents without feeling guilty or pressured to solve all their problems. I explained my decision to my wife, and she completely supported me. We agreed that the most important thing was the well-being of our family. I started to make small but significant changes. I called my parents and said I was willing to talk, but that it would be my way. I set clear boundaries, explaining that I couldn't help them financially, but I was willing to offer emotional support and help in other practical ways, such as counseling and financial planning. My mother was upset at first, but ended up accepting it. I think she realized I was serious about my decision, and I was. My father was more difficult. He always had a hard time accepting that I was doing things differently, but eventually he started to give in too. I think deep down, they knew they were asking too much of me. I started dedicating more time to my wife and children. I started planning family activities, weekend trips, short trips. I wanted to create happy memories for my children, something I didn't have in my childhood. I realized that being present in their lives was what really mattered. Seeing the smiles on their faces, the joy of being together, brought me a peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. My relationship with my grandparents also improved. They were relieved to know that I was finally dealing with my feelings and finding a way to move forward. We started spending more time together, reliving the good times and creating new ones. I wanted my children to know their great grandparents and feel the love I always felt for them. Little by little, I began to realize that I was not responsible for my parents' mistakes. I was under no obligation to solve all their problems. My therapist helped me to understand that helping others was not meant sacrificing my own well being or that of my family. I could be a good son without becoming a martyr. One of the most important things I learned was the importance of forgiving, not necessarily for others, but for myself. I realized that holding a grudge only hurted me. I decided that it was time to forgive my parents, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I decided to have a frank conversation with my parents. I explained to them everything I felt, how their decisions affected me. It was quite a difficult conversation, full of emotions, but it was necessary. They listened. And for the first time, I think they truly understood the depth of my pain. My mother cried, and my father was silent the whole time, but I knew this was a start. After that conversation, my relationship with my parents started to improve a lot. It wasn't an instant change, but little by little, we began to rebuild our relationship. I maintained my boundaries, but I was also more open to helping them in other ways. They began to realize that they couldn't depend on me financially, and this forced them to find other solutions. My wife and I remained focused on our family, and we decided it was time to expand, and soon received news that we were expecting our second child. It was a moment of joy and hope. I knew that no matter what happened to my parents, I was creating a loving, close-knit family. My parents still had their ups and downs, but I was more prepared to deal with them. I was stronger, more sure of myself. I knew I could help them without sacrificing myself, and most importantly, I knew my priority was my wife and children. The following years were filled with growth and learning. I learned to balance my responsibilities, to be a present and loving father, to support my wife in everything. Also, my relationship with my parents continued to improve, and I began to see small changes in them as well. They began to value my family more, to understand the importance of being present and supporting each other. So they applied that to me. My children grew up in an environment of love and security. I taught them the importance of family, honesty, and respect. I wanted them to know that no matter what happened, I would always be there for them. I wanted to be the father I didn't have, and I believe I did it. I look back now and see how my life has changed. I realized that the difficulties I faced made me quite strong, more resilient. I learned the importance of forgiving, setting limits, and prioritizing what really matters. My family is my priority, and I will do everything I can to ensure that they have a happy and safe life. My relationship with my parents still has its challenges, but now I know how to deal with them. I know that I don't need to carry the weight of the world in my shoulders, that I can help without sacrificing myself, you know? And most importantly, I know I deserve to be happy. My therapist helped me to see that my life is a journey of self discovery and growth, that it's okay to feel pain as long as I learn to deal with it in a healthy way. That forgiveness is a powerful tool, not for others, but for myself. Now I am at peace with my choices. I know I did the best I could under the circumstances, and I am proud of the man, husband, and father I have become. I look to the future with hope and determination, knowing that regardless of what happens, I am prepared to face any challenge. My wife and children are my priority and always will be. I want to create a home full of love, respect, and joy. I want my children to grow up knowing that they are loved and valued. And I want my wife to know that she can always count on me. You can, okay, Darla? At all times. Life isn't perfect, but I'm learning to find beauty in imperfections. I'm learning to live in the present and plan for the future without letting myself to be trapped by the past. I'm learning to be the best I can be for myself and for my family. And so I move forward with a lighter heart and a calmer mind. I move forward knowing that I am one with the right path. And that regardless of what happens, I have the strength and support necessary to overcome any challenge. And we've reached the end of the stories today. So, what did you think of the whole story? I recorded my wife cheating on me, and I can't stop watching it. A couple of weeks ago, I decided I wanted to surprise my wife with a kid-free night out. My parents live about an hour and a half away from us, and I arranged for the kids to stay with them for the weekend. Usually when I go to my parents, I am gone until later in the evening. We spend all day there and leave around dinner time. This time, I was dropping the kids off and immediately going home so I could surprise my wife and we could go out as soon as possible. I had made reservation at a nice restaurant and was hoping to go to a few places for some drinks first. I left at 8:30 and was back in our housing plan before 12:30. As I pulled onto my street, I saw a truck parked in front of my house. I did not recognize it. I assumed it was someone seeing the neighbors, though, because it's not that unusual for someone to park in front of our house. I parked a few houses away, thinking I would sneak into the house and surprise my wife instead of pulling in the driveway and going into the garage. I went in through a basement door. I was as quiet as possible, but as soon as I walked in, I heard her making sounds from the floor above. When I first heard it, I thought she was just by herself, maybe having some personal time, I didn't want to interrupt her privacy and embarrass her, so I was going to go back to my car and just go in the garage so she'd know I was home. Then I heard a man's voice. I immediately felt sick. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. It is hard to describe how I felt in this moment. I decided to go upstairs. I had no desire to confront them. I just wanted to see what was going on. I moved slowly and quietly and went up the stairs. The door was halfway open. The kitchen was empty, but I could tell they were in the living room. It was quite obvious what was going on at this point by the sounds. There was no way for me to look in the living room without them seeing me. I pulled out my phone and opened my camera app. I put my phone just around the corner of the wall, just like that. This part was hard to write. I could see my wife with a man I didn't recognize. I won't go into detail on what they were doing, but I think you can figure it out by yourselves. I started recording it. I was thinking that I needed a record of it for whatever I decided to do in the future. I just stood there in my kitchen, watching this all unfold on my phone screen. I felt like I could just scream at that moment, but for some reason I just froze completely. This went on for several minutes. She finally jumped off of him and made a comment about going to the bathroom, and they went upstairs. She even made a comment about how much time they had left. I walked into the living room and found this guy's pants. I took his wallet out and took pictures of his driver's license. I know his name and his address now. I'd never met him before. I have no idea how my wife knows him. I left the house the same way I entered. I went back to my car and cried like a pathetic man I am. I decided to watch the video to make sure it was recorded. I watched it all. I'll spare the details, but I sat in my car for at least half an hour. I couldn't drive for my parents and get the kids, as I would have to explain why. I decided that I would pull in the driveway, open the garage, and just pretend like I was there to surprise her. I took my time getting into the house. I made a lot of noise. When I saw her, she was very flustered, asking me why I was home, etc. She was in a robe and said that she was just getting ready for a bath. I told her about my plans and she seemed excited. She poured us both a glass of wine and said we would program before getting ready. I don't think I talked too much, really. She took me into the living room. I'm not proud of what I let happen. I could faintly see the guy sneaking downwards and going to the basement stairs, but I didn't say or do anything. I just let my wife continue doing what she was doing to me. Since that day, I have watched the video of her repeatedly. I can't bring myself to make any decisions on what I should do next. She seems to know something is wrong with me because she's asked a few times if I'm okay. I feel worthless, and every time I hit a low point, I watch that video again. I feel like I've watched it at least 10 times a day since I caught him. I stopped watching the videos after reading all the comments on my first post. It has helped clear my mind and allowed me to focus on the next steps. This has allowed me to be mostly back to my normal self for both my kids and my job. I have gone through my wife's phone and found nothing. I searched the guy's name from the driver's license. I figured out how they met. He's a landscaper. She was calling some a few months ago to clean up our yard and ended up getting some mulching and cleanup done. I've driven past his house many times. I think he's single, as I couldn't find any records of other people living in that address. I've only seen a truck parked on the driveway when I have driven by. I have been avoiding my wife after the kids are in bed to try to limit one time. I don't want any awkward conversation, and I don't want to have sex. I have been mostly successful with this, but did slip up one night when I had a little too much to drink. I hated myself for it the next day. I don't believe she has seen him since the day I caught him. I've been paying attention anytime she's gone. I obviously can track her 100%. I'm guessing any app I would put on her phone may be discovered. I have installed the doorbell camera on our house, though, so I can always see what's in the street. When I did this, my wife didn't say anything. We continue to do things as a family as we normally would. I have done my best to not let her know what I know and to continue to be a good dad to my kids. The weird thing I'm dealing with now is that she's planned a night out with a friend for drinks. It's a friend from work, so I don't know her at all, and I'm not connected with this person on social media. When she told me, I made up some excuse about work and said I couldn't watch the kids. She ended up getting our neighbor to agree to babysit. Now I'm debating if I should follow her to really see if she's meeting her friend or the guy. It seems like I'm heading towards a confrontation either way when I just want everything to go back to normal. I'm going to leave my house soon and pretend to be going to work. I'll probably just go to a bar to kill time until I can drive by the place she's supposed to be going to. I'm filled with fucking dread about all of this. Okay, so I drove to a nearby bar and parked the car, trying to decide what to do next. The feeling of dread wouldn't leave me, and the idea of following her consumed me. I ordered a beer and sat in a dark corner, observing the people around me without really seeing them. My mind was in a turmoil. I needed to talk to someone, but I didn't know where to start. But finally, I decided to call my best friend, Carlos. He had always been the guy I trusted for advice, even in the most complicated situations. I called him and asked him to meet me at the bar. Carlos arrived in half an hour, looking worried when he saw my expression. I told him everything, from the night I called my wife to my plan to follow her at night. He listened in silence, occasionally shaking his head and sighing. "You need to confront her, man. You can't keep going like this," he finally said. "This is destroying you, dude." I knew he was right, but the idea of confronting her filled me with dread. What would I say? What if she lied? What if she confessed everything? After a few beers and a lot of talking, I decided I would follow her. I needed answers. I needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. We left the bar and I drove to the place where she said she would meet her friend. I parked in a discreet spot and waited. My heart was racing and my hands were sweating. Time seemed to pass slowly as I waited. Finally, I saw her familiar figure leaving the building. She wasn't alone. My heart sank when I recognized the man with her, the landscaper. They were laughing and talking, clearly comfortable with each other. I followed them as they walked to a nearby bar. They went in and sat at a table in the back. I entered discreetly and found a spot where I could watch them without being seen. They seemed intimate, but not overly romantic. I watched as they talked and laughed, and a silent rage started to build inside of me. After an hour, they got up and left. I followed them in a nearby hotel. My mind was a whirl of thoughts as I watched them enter the lobby and walk in the elevator. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife, the woman I loved, was blatantly cheating on me. I felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over me. I knew I couldn't continue like this. I needed to do something. But what? I drove back home and sat in the living room, trying to process everything I had seen. Time passed slowly until I heard the front door open. She walked in, looking surprised to see me awake. "You're still up?" "Yeah," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Look, we need to talk." She looked nervous, but nodded and sat in the couch. I took a deep breath and started to tell her everything I knew. I told her about the video, about following her that night, about the hotel. Man, she started crying, saying that she was sorry, that it had been a mistake. I wanted to believe her. I wanted this to be a nightmare I could wake up from, but reality was harsh, dude. I decided I needed time to think. I told her I would spend a few days at my parents' house. She tried to argue, but I was determined. I needed distance to clear my mind. The next day, I packed my things and drove to my parents' house. I explained the situation to them, who were shocked and offered all their support. During the following days, I thought a lot about what to do. I talked to Carlos and other friends, close friends, trying to find clarity. Everyone had different opinions, but most agree that I needed to confront her definitely and decide the future of our relationship. Finally, I decided to go back home and have a final conversation with her. We needed to settle this once and for all. When I got home, she was waiting, looking anxious. "We need to talk," I said, sitting on a couch. She sat beside me, looking quite nervous. "I know I messed up," she began, tears streaming down her face. "But I love you and I want to fix this." Well, I watched her for a moment, trying to decide if I could just trust her again. "Look, this isn't something that can be easily fixed," I replied. "Trust has been broken, you know?" She nodded, wiping away her tears. "I know. I'm willing to do anything to regain your trust." We decided we would try couple therapy. I knew it would be a long and difficult road, but I needed it to give a chance. I loved my wife, and as much as this hurts me, I wanted to try to save our marriage. The following weeks were hard. We started going to therapy where we talked about our feelings and tried to understand what led to the affair. It was painful to relive those memories, those moments, but slowly I began to see a glimmer of hope. My wife was truly remorseful and did everything she could to regain my trust. Slowly, I began to believe that maybe we could get through this. I didn't know if our marriage would be the same as before, but I was willing to try. Gradually, I started to stop watching the video. I didn't need it anymore to remind me of what happened. I was focused on the future and trying to rebuild our relationship. It was a slow and painful process, but I knew that if we continued to work on it, we could find a path to healing. The future was still uncertain, but at least now we had a chance, and for now that was enough to keep trying. Returning home after spending a few days at my parents' house was a difficult decision. I knew our relationship would never be the same, but part of me still had hope. Even so, as I drove back, a sense of uncertainty overwhelmed me. Did I do the right thing by coming back home? Could I really trust her again? When I arrived home, my wife was waiting in the living room. She looked nervous, but also relieved to see me. She came over and hugged me, whispering that she was sorry and willing to do whatever it took to fix things. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to so much for everything to go back to normal, but the image of that video and that night continued to haunt my mind. The first few days back were strange. There was a tension in the air, something that had never been there before. My wife tried everything to please me, to make me comfortable. She cooked my favorite meals, gave me space when I needed it, and tried to start conversations about the future. However, I was still in doubt. Every time I looked at her, I couldn't get the scene I had seen out of my head. I went back to work, but my mind couldn't focus. Every time I was alone, my thoughts returned to that video. Our couples therapy sessions helped a little, but that allowed us to talk about the feelings in a controlled environment. Our therapist, Dr. Almeida, was kind but firm. She challenged us to confront our fears and insecurities. In one of the sessions, Dr. Almeida asked us to talk about how we felt when thinking about the affair. I described the pain and anger I felt, while my wife talked about her guilt and regret. It was painful, but also somewhat liberating. Yet the feeling of doubt persisted. I still wondered if I was doing the right thing. After therapy, we would go home and try to act normal, but the nights were the worst. Lying next to her in bed, I would toss and turn, unable to sleep. The images of this video and the scene I witnessed would come back to my mind. I would get up and go to the living room, sitting in silence, trying to process everything. One night, while I was in the living room, my wife appeared and sat next to me. She held my hand and said she was willing to do anything to regain my trust again. I looked at her and saw the sincerity in her eyes. Maybe there was a chance, I thought. Maybe, with time, I could learn to trust her again. I decided I needed some time alone to reflect. I asked her to take care of the kids and went to a friend's house for a few days. During that time, I thought a lot about our relationship, about what I wanted for the future. I talked to Carlos again, who told me that only I could decide what was best for me. When I came back home, I felt a little clearer about my feelings. I told my wife I was willing to try, but that we needed to be honest with each other. She agreed and promised to be transparent from now on. The weeks passed and we continued our routine of therapy, work, and taking care of the kids. There were moments of progress, moments where we felt we were reconnecting, but there were also moments of doubt, where I wonder if we could really get through this. One day, while we were in therapy, Dr. Almeida asked us to write letters to each other, expressing our feelings and hopes for the future. I wrote about the pain, but also about my desire to rebuild our relationship. When my wife read her letter, she talked about her regret and her hope that we could overcome this together. These letters helped us see that despite everything, there was still love between us. We decided to focus on small victories, on moments of reconnection. We started going out together again, doing things we enjoyed before all this happened. Slowly, we began to rebuild our intimacy and trust. There were still moments of doubt, of course, but sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night sweating, remembering the scene I had seen. But over time, these memories began to become less frequent. I started to realize that although I would never completely forget what happened, I could learn to live with it. One night, after putting the kids to bed, my wife and I were sitting on the living room talking about our plans for the future. She held my hand and said she knew it would be a difficult path, but she was willing to walk it by my side. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a small hope that we could really get through this. We started planning a small family trip, something to give us a fresh start. We knew it would be a long and arduous process, but we were committed to making it work. The decision to come back home, although difficult, turned out to be the right one for me. It was an uncertain path full of challenges, but at least, and sometimes, trying is the best we can do. I know we still have a long way to go, but every little victory gives us hope. I hope that one day we can look back and see this as a turning point in our relationship, a moment when we chose to fight for our love. As I continue to navigate these complicated feelings, I try to focus on the present and the future. I know there will be hard days, but I also know we are making progress. And for now, this is enough to keep trying. And we've reached the end of today's story. So, what did you think of this whole story? If you made it this far, don't forget to support the Curious One by clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel. Until the next story, goodbye.